True Crime Conversations acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast was recorded on. It's July 2015, and Lauren Trevan finds a business card in her letterbox. It's from a detective, and they want to speak to her husband. She's confused. What could the police possibly want with him? He's been unemployed for a year after being made redundant, and bills are starting to pile up with just her salary keeping their family of four afloat. But surely the police don't get involved in late bills, right? It can't be about her, despite her fear of him. His coercive control. She's never told anyone the extent of it, never even made a report. So what do the police want? It's about messages I sent to Emily, Kip tells her the next day, after being formally interviewed. It's nothing. They were completely innocent messages. Apparently there's an investigation into me, he continues. As Lauren will soon find out, her husband's messages to 13-year-old Emily were anything but innocent. And that's just the start. Kip has been messaging multiple young girls, abusing young girls, for years. All while Lauren, who'd been living in her own abusive relationship with him, had no idea. I'm Claire Murphy, and this is True Crime Conversations, a podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. There are many parallels between coercive control and child grooming. Both are insidious and silent to the outside world, and yet can happen right there in plain sight. Both are extremely damaging. Both have lifelong effects on victim survivors. Both are evident in the story that we're about to tell you. When Lauren started speaking out about her ex-husband's crimes, many shied away from those dark themes. It was all just a bit too much, too many horrible things at play. But as Lauren says, not discussing hard topics does not stop abuse from occurring. In fact, it only leaves victims and survivors more isolated. And she's determined not to contribute to the silence. Lauren's written a book called Now I See You. It details her experience, but is a fictionalised version of her story to protect the young victims within it. She joins us now. I guess, Lauren, what I wanted to know right from the get-go is how you found writing the book about your story, putting all of those words down on paper, because I imagine, recalling and retelling the story of what happened to you and a lot of people around you who you're very close to, that must have been an incredibly difficult journey for you.
It was difficult, but at the same time, I found it really cathartic, essentially. I found I was at a space in time where I had moved on from the story a little bit in my life so that no one around me was speaking about anything anymore. No one would really bring it up because it's the ugly, still fresh, but ugly past. And so me delving into the book was almost like a therapy because I still needed to talk about it. And I was just super passionate about getting my whole story out there so that, essentially I don't want him to be able to do it again. And I want other people to see signs to stop it happening again.
Well, let's talk about the him in question. The him in question is your ex-husband, Kip. Can you take us back to the beginning? Tell us a story about how you two fell in love.
So we met at a sporting club back in the very late 90s. He was actually dating one of my very close friends at the time, and I was dating another boy in the sporting team. And we all used to hang out together a lot. And essentially what happened is we both broke up with the other partners and then ended up pretty much getting together. It wasn't like I had a decision in that. I hadn't really thought about it. We were all at his house one night having drinks and all of a sudden he took me outside and kissed me. And I was like, oh gosh, it was a really big surprise to me that he was interested in me. He was this, super popular guy in the club. He'd been there forever and he was really talented and he was the type of guy when he would talk, people would listen around him. And I think I was just a little bit blown away by the fact he was interested in me at all. I hadn't really gone there in my head until it happened. And then obviously I was not close friends with that friend anymore after that. And I think I felt like I'd invested a lot into that relationship. So I kind of felt like, it was meant to be. It must have been meant to be if it means giving up these other good things in my life.
It's so interesting in reflection, is it, when you look at your entire story, that you can now pinpoint red flags before you knew red flags were coming your way? Because to have someone sort of come up to you and take that initiative and just kiss you seemingly out of nowhere when you've had no thoughts or feelings about this person leading up to that point, it's so hard to explain how now looking back that looks like a red flag. But in that moment, that feels very romantic and that feels very much like a fairy tale love story, right?
It was, and it did feel that way, and that's why I felt like, it must be meant to be. He must be my soulmate if it felt so good at the time, even though it was wrong at the time. And I think that's where he got me really invested in that relationship, because I'd already given up things before it even started to be with him. So, yeah, that was definitely the first warning, I would say.
Well, you mentioned there that you met at a sporting club. Kip's role within that club was quite important, right? And it only got more important as your relationship went along.
That's right. He always was coaching people, and he was definitely a senior member, and he ended up president of the club we were in as well, down the track. But when I got together with him, he was 29 years old and I was 20. So, yeah, already a bit of a power imbalance.
So looking at the club's perspective, was that your community? So you're both involved in this sporting club. He's quite an important person within that club. You've already mentioned a power dynamic between your age differences. Would you say there was then a power dynamic between his role in the club and your part within that club community?
Definitely at the beginning of the relationship. Over time, I sort of got myself my own position as such within the club, and was quite confident within the club myself. But yeah, certainly we were kind of like the mum and dad by the end of it in the club. We're talking over a 15-year period, so we were together a long time. But definitely at the start I was new to the club and learning skills and things like that and getting better at the sport. So yeah, it was definitely power imbalance in the club as well at the start.
So you two move in together pretty quickly, only after about 6 months, and you start to build a life together. Can you pinpoint the moment the controlling behaviour started? And did you recognise it in the moment, or was this only something that you recognised in hindsight?
There's two events that happened fairly close together. One was a friend of mine from high school sent me a text message on my phone, and Kip Walford, read the message at the time, and he was straight up jealous and it was over the top jealous. I can't remember the exact conversations because it's 20-something years ago now, but it just went on for days almost. It was way too much. It was more than what I really had to go out of my way to convince him, no, I love you and only you. And this was very early on in the relationship, like within a couple of years. And the other thing, really early event that I remember clearly is waking up at like 4 a.m. with him just turning the bedroom light on. I was asleep. He'd gone out drinking and sort of to some local clubs, and he just stood in the doorway leaning against the door jamb and just boomed at me, "Who's been here?" with the light flat out. And I was just so taken aback and sat up and half asleep. And I'm like, what are you talking about? No one's been here. It was in his unit. Of course, no one had been there. And he goes, "I can tell because the toilet paper's hanging differently." And that was just it took me hours after that to settle him down and say, no, I didn't have anyone here. And you couldn't convince him. It was like we were talking about two different relationships. So he made me work really hard to convince him I hadn't done anything wrong when I actually hadn't done anything wrong. I'd just been in bed. And he made me work very hard to try and convince him of that, and I couldn't convince him. It took way too long, and he ended up just passing out on the bed. And I think I felt sick for days after that, because I don't think there were so many different little events that happened over time that kind of mold into one another now. You know what I mean? Like so it's hard to pinpoint exactly, but those sort of things would happen, and then he wouldn't speak to me for days, and I'd have to, worm my way back into his life, if that makes sense. But then things would be brilliant again once our relationship got back on track, and he'd be loving, and I'd go back into that honeymoon stage, the way our relationship had started, and he was, all kind words. He was always very good with his words.
Did you at any stage when you're going through these things where he's accusing you of having another man at the house, did it ever occur to you at that moment that he might be reflecting his own behaviours back at you, that the reason he was so concerned that you had a man in the house is because he was the one who was being unfaithful to you outside of your house?
This is how blinded I was by this man. He could convince me of just about anything. I literally found him in bed with a really good friend of mine one morning, and my friend got up at 6 a.m. and she ran out of the house, and I'm friends with her again now because I know what happened that night, but it certainly wasn't her instigating it, and she was trying to get out of it. And he convinced me over the coming days that he had been so drunk that he couldn't even remember if he'd done anything wrong, but he loved me, and it wasn't really cheating if he couldn't remember it anyway. And it sounds so silly and dumb now, but we're talking a few years into our relationship now, and I was so invested. I'd moved in with him. He was my dream man, and he was promising me the life I really wanted, and I thought we were meant to be together, and I just would have been so humiliated if it had ended that way. And I just thought, well, no, I can move on from this if it wasn't really cheating. So he really did a good job of convincing me. So no, I didn't see back then that he was reflecting his own behaviours onto me.
When you talk about your friend who ran out of the house that day, and I know that you're really mindful of not sharing other people's stories because it's not your story to tell, but you mentioned that now what happened that night. What did happen that night? How did she explain what had happened between her and your then boyfriend?
To be honest, we're only recently back in contact through Instagram, of all things. We live in different states, and I'm sure we will catch up properly, but all she's really said is I saved her by walking in, at the time I walked in, and she hasn't been able to say much else. I think she was in a really sticky situation that she didn't want to get in and didn't really know how to get out of it, because we were all, raised to be polite, and I think that we didn't really stand up for ourselves as much as we do nowadays.
That could also be said, I guess, of you taking on all of the mental load of running your home too, is that there's this expectation that that's just the woman you're supposed to be, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So you mentioned that you also got yourself a role within the club and you are working full time. So obviously you're in the world and you're achieving things and, growing. How did Kip react to your successes?
Specifically, my biggest one that shines for me was when I came home after finishing my nursing course, and I was so excited. I was graduated nursing. I was going to be able to work now after 2.5 years, and I was so excited, and he barely grunted at me. I realise now that I look back, it was him not being able to share joy in something that I'd done for myself, because he was very good at talking me up with things he'd had a hand in. If I got a new skill that he'd showed me, I was, good at that, 4-wheel driving or something like that. he could be proud of me because he'd shown me how. So it was actually his accomplishment, if that makes sense. Yeah, now that I look back, that's what it was.
Can you tell the story about the margarine? You bought a different brand because most of us do when we go shopping, we're looking for bargains, right? So you've gone for something that's just a little bit cheaper than what you usually would get. How did he react to that?
Well, that specific story is relating to in my book, Now I See You, which I fictionalised. But that was something that was a conversation that came up a lot. It just wouldn't have happened that I buy the wrong margarine because that is the margarine he has. That's the margarine he's always had, and that's the one. And there was a cheese I had to buy, and there was just things that you just did for him to keep the peace, so you knew that you wouldn't get his negativity and he wouldn't be – you just didn't want to upset him. I remember not long after us getting married that I brought up something he'd done and he just would flip the script, and he went on for hours and hours about how miserable his life was and with me, and that I didn't have enough sex with him, and that getting married, this is a few months into our marriage, getting married had ruined our sex life, had ruined our life. I just thought, oh my God, I literally said to myself, if I want to stay with this guy, I have to just have sex with him whenever he wants to, so he can never do that to me again, because it just went on late into the night. He'd sort of keep me up with this sleep deprivation of arguments that just went on and on and on, and it just wore me down, and it was like this sort of mind fuckery, if that makes sense. It was more than that, because it was like, again, talking about two different relationships. I actually started to keep a sex diary after that because I wanted to be able to, no, here, we had sex here. I didn't want him to be able to have a go at me like that again. But again, in between those times, it would be like that never happened, and you think, oh, God, I'm so glad that's over. Thank God that's not going to happen again. I'll make sure that doesn't happen again, that he, gets that upset with me about something that he's berating me. But over time, it just got worse and worse in the relationship. And, yeah, he would say things. He was constantly jealous. He said he put cameras all over the house so he'd know if I had someone there.
Do you remember the first time you heard the term coercive control?
Yes, I do, very clearly. I was listening to a podcast with Laura Richards speaking about it, and this was well after my relationship had ended. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's what happened to me. I was exact like everything, the manipulation with the threat of suicide when I tried to leave, just so much of it over time, and just the whittling down of who I was. Because after 15 years with him, I'd taken on his political views. I just literally became this sort of yes person to him.
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Claire Murphy. I'm speaking with Lauren Trevan, author of the book Now I See You. Up next, Lauren tells us about the first time Kip's abuse turned physical. Did the violence against you ever turn physical? I mean, obviously feeling like you're forced to have intimacy with a man in the way that it has now been laid out for you, that in itself is physical violence. But did it ever escalate to a point where you felt for your bodily safety?
Probably last few years of our relationship, I realised how trapped I was and how frightened of him he was. He'd always been very much a violent person, never with me. Like he'd punched holes in walls in the house, and he'd stood over me with, nostrils flaring and fists clenched and things like that, but never actually touched me in a physically violent way. But, for an example, we were sitting outside with some neighbours one day, two brothers that had moved in above us quite early on in our relationship, the first 5 years. And I don't know what one of the brothers did or said, but he all of a sudden pushed the table out, jumped up and threw this brother into the wall, like a brick wall, because of something the brother had said or looked at me funny, or like it was a jealousy thing. And obviously we didn't stay friends with those neighbours. He was a volatile person, but everyone kind of relied on him because he was a huge guy. He was 6'3", or is 6'3", and at that time he was built, like a rugby forward. He was a big, big guy. And he kind of commanded, he'd be the one to end the fights. Other people would start him. His mates would start the fights and he'd be the one to finish the fights.
Well, I wanted to ask you that. If he's known to be a sort of fairly physically violent guy, was anyone looking out for you? Like, was anyone asking the question?
No one was asking that question specifically, but I was not sharing just about anything, what was going on behind closed doors, how I was in the marriage. We did present like a pretty healthy relationship, I think, out in public. But, and by the time we had children and things like that, we just presented as this, a busy little young family. But no, I do remember my friend one day having lunch with her and I was explaining something. I can't even remember what had happened the night before. And I did confide in her and she said to me, "Why don't you leave him? He treats you like shit." And I said, even in that early days, I had really young babies and I remember saying to her, because I know leaving him is going to be way harder than trying to live with him. And I was already without me admitting it to myself properly, I was already frightened because I didn't know what he was capable of if I did leave, because I always given in and behaved the way he wanted me to behave, if that makes sense.
What was it like for you when you were pregnant and having babies, when you're even more vulnerable than what you already are in that relationship?
So when I got pregnant with my first daughter, he was at first seemed quite happy, but then the pregnancy seemed like a real hassle to him because I was sick all the time. Morning sickness wasn't morning sickness for me. It just was there the whole pregnancy, every day. I'd pretty much wake up throwing up and then it would just continue. It wasn't a lot of fun. So probably wasn't a lot of fun to be around back then. But it was really tough and I was hoping that pregnancy would, make him stop smoking and make him stop drinking and, nothing. No, I thought it would bring us closer together, but it didn't. Did the opposite. He'd just, take off and do his own thing on the weekend.
What kind of dad was he?
He was super lovely to the children in terms of he was always great with kids. And when he was around them, he'd, happily bounce them on his knee and stuff like that. But in terms of doing the hard yards of parenting, I pretty much did most of that. He'd come in and, he changed some nappies. He was certainly not the worst parent that you've ever heard of at all, but he was not supportive of me at all.
When did you realise he was tracking your car?
Well, that I cannot prove, but I just was at a work function and he rang me and said to me, so it could have been my phone, I don't know, but it was a work function that wasn't at work, but it was at a pub around the corner, but it was an education night. And it was just the way, because when you're in these relationships, it can be like the slightest look that they give you and something's really amiss, or the slightest difference in his tone. And the difference in his tone when he said, he sort of answered the phone and goes, "Oh, where are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm at the work function." And he goes, "No, where are you exactly?" And I just at that, it just clicked to me. He knows where I am. I'm sure he knows where I am. And he's asking, why am I at a pub? He's saying I'm lying to him. I think he thinks he's caught me out doing something wrong. And it just dawned on me that, and I never felt like safe after that in terms of him. Like I just figured he knew where I was all the time. And I knew by then he was reading my messages. So, he was much more tech savvy than me.
So you've gone through quite a lot. You've asked him to move out. He's refused. You know, he's controlling you. Is he also controlling finances? Is he isolating you from people and money and things like that they often see in coercive control cases?
So, yes, he was the major money earner, and he would give me one of his cards to use, but we never had joint bank accounts. And even when I went back to work, he would just pay all the major bills and things like that. And so our money was kept quite separate. In terms of isolating, he would, in a clever, manipulative way, he'd say little snide comments about my best friend, for instance. He was very, very clever. He would never outright tell me I could or couldn't do things as well. But he would, if I went to a mother's group dinner, he would just make my life miserable when I got home. And he'd say, I would get accused of having another affair or something like that would happen when I came home, or something would happen. He'd just be miserable around me and I couldn't. He just made things not worth doing. I describe coercive control as, those dog collars that people put on dogs that don't have fences, that as soon as they hit the boundary of the fence, they get an electric shock. And that's what coercive control is. It's not this outright. It's you learn, you take one step forward and one step back or two steps back because you learn, and then it's like getting hit by a baseball bat when you break the rules that you didn't know were there, if that makes sense. It really does screw with your brain.
Yeah.
And you just don't recognise yourself.
After the break, Lauren tells us about the moment she realised that the man she was married to was not who she thought he was. Well, take us to that day in 2015. There's a business card in your letterbox. What happened after that?
So there was a police card in our letterbox, and I just said to him, "Oh, what's this for?" And he goes, "Oh, I'll sort it out later. I don't know." And anyway, he wasn't working at that stage. He'd been made redundant the year before and still didn't have a job, close to a year later. So he should have been home in that evening, but I'd gone and got the kids and everything. And anyway, finally at 8:30 at night, he rang me on my phone and I said, "Wow, where are you?" I had been really worried. And he goes, "I was just interviewed by the police." And he actually said, his actual words were, "This fucking bitch of a detective just interviewed me."
Well, so he was interviewed by a woman. That would have been,
yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, I met her later on, this one who first, and she said, "Oh my God, he made my skin crawl the first time I met him." And I'm like, "Oh, I wish he had done that to me."
Yeah.
But no, so anyway, he said he was being investigated for using some carriage service to send messages to one of the girls in the club. And I said, "What do you mean?" And he started to talk about this girl, and I said, "She's 13. Why are you messaging her anyway?" And he goes, "Oh, it was all about this coaching I was doing with her on the weekend, and it was all in jest, and it was just stupid stuff, and the family's being malicious because the dad doesn't like me." And anyway, I was convinced of that, and I just believed him even though something felt really wrong in my guts about it, something felt really off. And it was on the Saturday after that we had our AGM, and we were all seated around this table at one of the members' houses, and Kip had gotten up and resigned as president and went outside because of the investigation. He had to resign, and he went outside, and then I got all uppity and said, "I hope that, I want this whole family banned after all this comes out."
So you were going in on his defence.
Oh my gosh, yes. And then I'm so embarrassed by it now, but someone ended up just saying to me, "Oh, Lauren, just wait until you know what's happened." And I'm like, "Oh no, I know what's happened." Anyway, the meeting went on, and then someone handed me a transcript because the mother of this girl had sent it to the club. And I was on the committee, so they handed it to me to read. And when I read the messages, I was just blown away. It was not my husband. It was not his voice. It was not the way he sends text messages. It's all smiley faces and ha-ha-has and something about wish I could be chasing little hotties like you, and he wanted to massage her butt and all. Like, this is a 13-year-old. He was 45 at this time. There was nothing in jest about it. When I was reading it, it was sickening. And I just got up and I said to my best friend, I got to go. And I wrangled the kids together, who were 3 and 6 at the time. And I popped them in the car, and then he must have found out I was leaving the house, and I just screamed at him and said, "You sound like a fucking pedophile. Do not come home." And that was the end of my relationship with him.
That young girl that they found the text messages between the two, that was really found by accident. Like, a mum was just up one night, he sent a late night message, the phone happened to be near her, she happened to intercept it at the time. So had it not for been that kind of aligning of planets, we might never have known about this behaviour. But then you would find out that it was more than one girl. How did you then find out that this behaviour was actually quite the norm for him?
So I think it was quite early on. It was within weeks. It was all a bit of a blur in that time, as you can imagine, because my marriage was over in like 2 seconds. My very, very close friend rang me, and she said one of her daughters had called her and said that he had molested her one night. And that was the next person coming forward. And at that stage, she decided to go to the police as well and do a statement. And then the police ended up calling a whole club meeting, and I didn't go because I figured people won't talk freely around me because they might think I'm on his side or something. I really wanted the girls to know that I supported them, because it was a family club. Like, everyone in it felt like my family. We spent so much time together, and these young girls, some of them had babysat my children. I had babysat some of these girls as well. Anyway, it just slowly drip until more girls came forward, and eventually we found out there was up to seven girls that and he'd done much more than just send messages. That was how he would start his he hasn't formally been charged with grooming because those grooming laws didn't exist at that stage. But, I mean, essentially, if you were to look at the definition of grooming, that's what was happening.
And he was doing this from when some of these girls were like 11, right?
That's right, yeah. Yes. So he would start by sending messages and getting closer, and they'd be harmless at first, and then he'd slowly start to sexualise the messages, like add in. And a few of the girls had almost called him out on being rude in his messages. Like, one of them actually just wrote back pedo or something, and he stopped messaging her. And there was definitely girls that had said they had messages, but their parents didn't want them to go to the police. So anyway, I'm sure it was bigger than it was. But yes, he was initially charged with 7 offences, and then child sex offences, and then that was ranging from using a carriage service to cause offence to pretty much sexual penetration of a child under 16. And he ended up getting charged with 47 charges in total. But by the time you go to trial, they whittle that down to the most. They say in Australia, I don't know why, they say that the jury, they try and just consolidate it into just a smaller group of charges, like the most serious. So, yeah, in the end, he was tried for 25 of those crimes against, 7 girls.
And was he found guilty of all those?
He was found guilty of all but one of the text message charge where the girl had deleted it and she couldn't exactly remember what had been said. So you can understand that. And then he was found, one of the charges gave an alternate charge. So I think it's 23 offences in the end, 3 of rape he was found guilty of, and then a whole bunch of other charges that he was guilty of.
Did it make you question what had maybe happened with your own children?
Absolutely it did, yes. So after reading those messages, I rang his family and I was saying, look, I'm nervous about leaving the children with him, because he's going to come and see the children. And anyway, child protection got involved very early on, which I was grateful for at the time, and they put in place that the children had to be supervised around his children within line of sight and hearing by his mother. Yeah, so that was the first. So that was within a month of us finding out. So that was before the charges were laid and everything. So that was within a month of us finding out about the messages. He was, not to see the children unsupervised.
So he's still allowed access to his children after he's been accused. Is he still allowed access after charges are laid against him?
Yes. So he was allowed access despite me saying that I didn't believe his mother wasn't supervising properly, because the kids would come home and say, they were out doing something, they had been at the beach or something, and, oh, no, but he was out in the boat with the kids. And I'd say, oh, was Grandma there? Oh, no, she was on the beach. And it's like, that's not supervising. And anyway, it was like talking to a brick wall in the family court, trying to get anything changed once it's written down as a consent order, because I'd signed consent orders that she could supervise. Despite them making her sign an undertaking, I still didn't believe that she was supervising properly. But, the family court was not a good experience at all. I remember I was thinking, because his family started taking him into the school. On at least one occasion he was there with his mother, but then off reading with another little child in my daughter's class, or other kids as well.
So, sorry, he's been allowed onto school grounds after being charged with child sexual offences?
47 charges at that stage, and including, sexual penetration of children. So at that stage, I didn't even know about it until my daughter said, oh, Daddy was in class today. And I was like, oh, wow. And I'd moved her schools, so no one recognised him as her dad. And then she was really excited. And I said, was he reading to you, just reading to you? And she said, no, other kids too. And I rang the police and said, surely that's breaking bail. And they said, unfortunately, it's not, because his mother was there with him, because he had to be with another adult to be with other girls under 16. It didn't say anything about schools, the bail, strictly. And so I rang Child Protection. They said they couldn't help. And then I rang the school and said, which I had not wanted to do, I didn't want them knowing what was going on. And I ended up just telling them everything, because I said, you cannot have this man in a classroom. I said, what are people going to say, when the parents going to say when they find out a charged sex offender's in the classroom reading to their little Johnny by himself around the corner? I could not get over how our system lets us down. And that's what I was going to say as well about when I met the children's lawyer in family court. I thought family court will be, a breeze for someone like me who's going into it with he's a child sex offender. Nope. He still has just as many rights as, that the whole focus was all about maintaining his relationship with the children rather than the children ought to be protected from a child sex offender. So it it was really, that part of it was really tough.
So while you're fighting the system, there's all these parents of young girls who are having to face the reality that their young daughters have been groomed, sexually assaulted by a man that they knew and trusted. And as you mentioned, these people have been like family to you.
Mm.
Like, this is your community. How did you then go on? Do you remove yourself from that community? Do you try and speak to the people who've been impacted by this? Like, how do you then move forward from this?
Well, I didn't feel like I could go back to the club at all, ever. So I was pretty heartbroken by that. I was just too, I guess, ashamed at that stage. But I really wanted the girls to know, every girl to know that I was 100% behind them straight away. So it was very early on. I sent a big group message to all the girls saying how much I supported them and was, hoping that if anything has happened to them or he's sent any inappropriate messages, I can't remember exactly what I wrote, but I just said that I really loved them all and that I want them to speak to the police if they can and that I fully support them the whole way.
How was your relationship with the parents? Because I understand there's a family whose 2 daughters were molested by your ex-husband and she was very close to you. You guys are really good friends. How does that relationship end up after all this?
We're still really, really great friends and I see her daughters still and we're, very much, we don't live in the same state anymore, but we'll be in contact for life. And I have intermittently kept up to date and on social media, I keep up with all those girls to see, them living their lives and make sure that everything's going. Because for them to stand up, at that stage, some of them were, so young and they're standing up to this man that I never could. And it was so impressive to me that it really helped me get the strength to, stay away from him and to give evidence against him at his trial. And those girls are all very, very phenomenal, beautiful, beautiful human beings. So despite what he did, he didn't destroy any of them. So I'm so proud of them for that.
When you said that one of those girls messaged him back calling him a pedo,
yeah.
I can only hope that our daughters have enough of that determination in them to also respond like that. You must have been really relieved to know that some of those girls really were equipped to understand what he was, because not all kids are educated to be able to identify it. And you yourself didn't see any of it. It's really difficult when these people are manipulating, especially young, vulnerable people. But to know that a young teenage girl has already clicked in her brain that this is not right, you must have been so immensely proud of a really young woman to be able to do that.
I was. And I think that was also a sign of him getting cocky in what he was doing, because by that stage he was quite a few years down the track of abusing girls. I think early on he really took his time before he sort of would sexualize the messages, and I think he was starting to get, to be honest, a bit cocky that he could just have anything he wanted. To be honest, I still think he thinks he's done nothing wrong and that all those girls, he just was convinced that they wanted him as well. I don't. He said to the family court reporter that he had done nothing wrong and then accused me of another affair, and he's done nothing worse than what I'd done by having an affair that didn't happen. So it's coercive control as well. He's manipulating them, he's manipulating the parents. He looked like this great upstanding citizen with a wife and 2 children at his side in a sporting community club. And he was the one who would say to the parents, don't worry, I'll be at that event to look after them, if you can't make it. And, he was the guy that we trusted. And he was it was quite phenomenal. He abused girls in my house when I was there. It's just, when they read the sentencing remarks and all his offending came out, it was quite phenomenal to sit through. But I was really proud of the jury for getting it right, in my opinion. And the judge at the time, Judge Wistusen, I felt like he saw us all, and he said, because his lawyers wouldn't let me do a victim impact statement because I wasn't a victim. And that's what I was told along the whole way. I was the only one who was financially affected and needed the money because I had to move out at that stage. But I was the only one not a victim, which I understand. But I also was as broken in a sense as a victim. Like, I was broken by that man for a long time. And I wanted to do a victim impact statement because it did affect me and the children. And eventually the judge turned around and he stopped listening to the argument that I couldn't do one, and he just said, she loved those girls. And then that's when I felt like he'd heard us, he'd listened to us. He was all over the case when I knew that he knew that I loved them as well, and he goes, that's fine. She's not a victim in the sense of a victim. She's or a family member of the victim. And he said, but she loved them. So that was beautiful, that moment.
He is found guilty, sentenced to 14 years, but still makes your life difficult. Like, you have to fight him to be able to move interstate. Obviously, there will come a day where he'll be set free. How do you feel about that?
Honestly, in a way, I'm terrified, but I also want to stand up and scream from the highest mountain, because I feel like every time I tell my story and more people know about it, the silence is what gives them power. And by me staying silent, it's just making him all powerful, knowing that I'm sitting in a little hole, afraid to talk about any of this. Whereas I need to take some of that power away from him, and it gives me strength knowing that people are behind me. He can't do anything to hurt me because it's going to be so obvious. Do you know what I mean? Like, if he comes for me or anything like that, everyone's going to know. So he can only do it once, right? So I'm refused to live in fear when he gets out. Obviously, ask me in a few years' time how I feel, because yes, I'm terrified, but I'm also so determined, so bloody determined, because I am sick to death of these people getting away with this crap, and then he's going to get out of jail and no one's going to know about it. It's like it never happened. It's like it never happened, and he'll just be able to pick up his life where it left off, in a sense. I know it won't be the same, but I don't want him to be able to do it again. And I want more people, the more people that know about it, it's better for all of us. These things, people need to get comfortable with talking about uncomfortable topics, because child sex offending is happening everywhere right now, and we need to step up and do a lot more to stop it.
What does life look like for Lauren now? She's still essentially partly living that past life, because you've made it your mission, as you've just said, to make sure this doesn't happen again. But Lauren still has to move forward in life too. So where have you found yourself now? Are you happy? How are your kids feeling? And do they know what's happened with Dad? Like, what's their understanding of everything?
So my daughter doesn't want to know yet what he's done. They both know he's in jail. My son knows a little bit of what he's done, but none of them really know the whole story. They really don't bring him up anymore at all. They see their cousins and they love their cousins and are happy to see them. But The kids are doing really, really well. They've got a brand new life in a new state that they've just settled into. I mean, honestly, they're just like every other little crazy teenager that drives you nuts.
Mine isn't there yet, but I'm not sure I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, I've got 2 teens as of the other day. So, yes, that they're challenging regardless of but my daughter, she got me to come and speak at her cohort at school last year about healthy relationships and tell my story of coercive control. And, that's the whole pointing out to kids in year 10 that extreme jealousy does not mean they're really into you. It's a really scary sign that someone's trying to control you. And it's one of the first things at that age, and anyone who wants to be with you and your partner should be someone who wants to see you as your very best version of yourself. It shouldn't be someone trying to make your world smaller, which is what these coercive controllers do. They try and isolate you. They try and belittle you. They try and make you feel so that you're nothing, that you're completely codependent on them. And that's what they gain out of it. Whereas, someone who's a good relationship, which I have now, is someone you can talk to, someone who wants to see you do your best, someone who celebrates your wins in life and wants to see you have a vast and big friendship group. They don't want you to not go out again because, they want to see you happy. And that's what I would say to every young person going into a relationship, because that is a surefire way to tell very early on if someone's, trying to shut down your world and make it smaller, then it's not a good person.
Thanks to Lauren for helping us tell her story. You can find a link to her book, Now I See You, in our show notes. True Crime Conversations is hosted by me, Claire Murphy. Our producer is Tali Blackman, with audio design by Jacob Round. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another True Crime Conversation.